Greetings and salutations, friends. My name is, of course, Charles Q. Banks, and I'd like to welcome you to another episode of Charles Anime Episode Summary and Review of Gunsword Episode 2. That was very poetic of me, but it just comes naturally. It doesn't really. But anyway, this episode was good, but I was very disappointed at first with it. But then eventually I came around to liking it and actually appreciating what it had done. Now, in order to understand that, we need to look back at episode 1 and see what it set forth. Basically, the, main character is a vagabond wearing a tuxedo with lots of secrets. He has a sword that can summon a giant robot from the heavens, which he uses against the bad guys who are oppressing these towns in a cowboy, western, sci-fi sort of way, an aesthetic. And of course he has a little sidekick in Wendy, who is clinging to his coat-tails, quite literally sometimes, and he is very loath to have her along in his quest for vengeance. And inevitably he'll stumble into one of these bully, boss, bad guy characters and have it out with them at first, try to get them to change their ways peaceably or not even address the problem, whereas Wendy is trying to get him to address the problem, and then in the end he has to call down his mech and absolutely destroy the enemy. Reticently, of course, because he is just, what do they say, ambivalent toward good and evil, right? So that was good for the first episode because it was bombastic, it was dynamic, it was dramatic, and the animation was beautiful! It was excellently drawn and animated, with very fluid animation throughout the entire episode. This episode kept to the formula to a T without adding almost anything to it, while at the same time decreasing the quality of the animation. Now, that sounds like quite the disappointment, and I was definitely disappointed to see that it turned from character development and dynamic facial expressions and stuff to just, flat scenes of people flapping their lips and almost zero facial expressions during any conversation, which, you see this sometimes in certain anime shows, not all of them, and I wouldn't even say the majority of them, but there are definitely some anime that start out really strong in the first episode with great animation, and then they slow it down on purpose, slow down the quality, maybe even the effort, in order to save it up for the big explosions of awesome animation. We definitely see that in some recent shows, like Black Clover, where the first couple of episodes looked beautiful. Episodes, I said. But then, of course, throughout the rest of the show, most of it, I would say maybe 75%, looks gosh awful, if I can say that. So this definitely doesn't look gosh awful like Black Clover sometimes, but it does not look as good as the first episode. This second episode looks very much like there was a dip in quality. And the story of this episode overall is very lackluster. It's not trying to reinvent the wheel. It's not really actually delving into any relevant plot details. It's basically just a side story in which Wendy is realizing that she is actually a child and can do almost nothing that a mature person could do, and she just holds everybody back most of the time, which is kind of sad, but she has to, come to grips with it, which is a good little moral to learn. We also meet Carmen 99, or Carmen QQQ, which is referring to her bust size. So one would expect her to be, a total fan service character, which her design definitely is that, but at the same time, they didn't really do a whole lot with that. They didn't go into those fan servicey scenes or anything. They kept it pretty classy. She herself is kind of a seductress secret agent, but at the same time, they didn't focus on that, which I'm, very happy about. This is a very classy decision, Gunsword. So they meet her, and like I say, they run into an oppressive bad guy who is drawing people in and women in so that they can breed an independent nation with these mustachioed men who are part of the navy of this certain mayor of Bridgetown who is building a secret mech underneath the bridge, because Bridgetown is literally a town on a bridge. Go figure. So Wendy and Vaughn enter this town on their way to finding the claw-handed man and Wendy's brother, who passed through that area previously. So they're on the trail of the claw-handed man. So they're, like, following the trail of the plot, but nothing really important happens here other than Vaughn's own name becoming more well-known. He saves a bunch of all the women that were being attacked and put in prison as basically slaves to the men, which it's kind of interesting, like the way that these people are shown. The mayor is literally a mustache-twirling villain. Like, you couldn't get any more cliched than this. It's just like those melodramatic villains of ye olden times in black and white theater and film is just, that's the villain of this episode. And eventually they defeat him, like I said, with the mech. And, the mech part with the action, 2 giant mechs fighting, one ship against Vaughn's bright white mech. It takes place in a matter of minutes, like 2 minutes at most, of action. And the rest of it is dialogue and events happening in fits and starts, I would say. With a lot of the same thing that happened in the first episode happening again. Vaughn is shown to be pretty eccentric in his tastes as to what he likes to eat. He just puts tons of sauces on any dish and just eats it and expects other people to like it as well, which is gross. And it's like, yeah, of course it is. We saw this already in the first episode, but he keeps doing it, and we don't really learn anything more about him in this episode. But there was an interesting detail, and that is that he isn't aware of what a bank is. And Wendy goes to a bank to withdraw money to keep herself alive, and she has a bank account. So I guess, there's some kind of electronic banking system in this world. So the world building is there. There is some really good world building in this show that I can definitely appreciate. You can tell that this Bridgetown that they go to is like northwest of where they were before, where the town where Wendy came from is down somewhere in the southeast, I guess. So there's definitely some interest there. But like I say, the boss, once the big bad mayor man with the elastic metal mustache that he tries to stab people with, once he is defeated, and he totally was killed by Vaughn. The ship he was on just got blasted with hot magma, and they're all dead. So, Vaughn truly is ambivalent both to good and evil. He just saves who he wants to save. And all of those mustachioed men who served in the Navy are all dead. Which is very convenient, because now the town is just completely free, and they can move on. You see my point. It's a very, a totally cliched premise, with a little bit of a moral for the young girl, Wendy, and we meet a new mysterious character who also doesn't reveal much about herself, but she is also going to be in the rest of the show, I hope. But they part ways at the end of this episode, and she kind of befriends Wendy. So, yeah, there's not a whole lot more to say about this episode, and that's kind of a negative thing, but at the same time it's a positive thing, because I feel like this show doesn't take itself seriously, for one. There's a lot of joking, a lot of jesting going on, like the fact that the mayor has these, metallic mustaches, whiskers that he uses to kill people, is actually pretty hilarious. And it's basically this kind of fascist, misogynist, baseline evil villain that is being expressed here, which is just super cliched and kind of dumb, but also it's like perfect villain of the week. We're done. We can move forward with this show. So it's probably going to be that this is the formula for most of the episodes, and that the quality will again increase once we get back to the main plot line and we actually have a battle or duel between the main characters and the main villain. So it's all leading up to that, and it'll probably have a big explosion of animation once we get there. But we're not there yet. So I would say this episode was maybe a 6 or a 7. Not a whole lot new to talk about, but a show doesn't really always need to be hyper exciting and new and interesting and creative all of the time. The baseline of this show has been established, and that's enjoyable enough as far as I'm concerned. Not every episode has to be better and better than the last. I'm kind of used to that because I've been watching Attack on Titan recently, which that is the point. If it's not ratcheting up in thrills and chills, then the the show has lost its grip on what it's meant to be, and it does that a couple of times. But we're not talking about Attack on Titan right now. We're talking about Gun Sword, and it definitely does not keep that level of intensity that the first episode had in this episode, but it also doesn't need to. All it needs to do is to be enjoyable, and we'll get the same amount of action and interest, character development, as we saw in the first episode throughout this show, as evidenced by this episode, but maybe not the same animation quality. So, yeah. I liked it. Let me know what you thought of this episode in the comments below. I'm going to continue watching this show because, again, it has a lot of the things I love in it. The Western aesthetic, the spaghetti Western vengeance story, the crazy sci-fi world building meshed with that Western aesthetic. Yeah, it's very interesting. And like I say, the art design is definitely able to overcome those dips in quality just with the power of their visuals. It was a fun romp, and that's great in my book. So, until next time, farewell. I'll continue with the next episode, episode 3, in the next video.